Life used to feel simple and predictable. My twin brother Lance and I were always in competition despite being twins. Our parents with a sense of humor named us Arthur and Lance like knights of legend, but our relationship was anything but knightly. Lance, with his effortless charm and athleticism, always seemed to excel, while I, the older twin by 2 minutes, struggled to gain recognition. It's funny how childhood dynamics shape your entire life. Reflecting on my marriage to Paige, I realize it mirrored that competition, constantly chasing something just out of reach. When we met, she seemed perfect, smart, beautiful, and driven. We built a life together, kids, a suburban home, stable jobs, but over time something essential was missing, turning our marriage into a routine instead of love. As I rushed out of the house, my body gave out. I vomited violently, releasing more than just fast food. It was the pent-up pain and bitterness I had swallowed for too long. The reality of my broken marriage hit me hard. Paige followed me outside, barefoot, pleading. I shook her off, yelling at her to leave me alone as I sped away, drowning her voice with the car's engine. In the rearview mirror, I saw her standing there in her bathrobe, arms crossed, looking worried but not enough to stop me. The realization that there was no love left between us hurt more than catching her in the act minutes earlier. It wasn't a new revelation, just an old truth I had avoided facing. At Lance's apartment, he greeted me with concern, but I brushed past him and collapsed on the couch. His messy apartment always annoyed me, with dirty dishes and clothes strewn everywhere. He'd been playing video games when I arrived, typical Lance. "Everything okay, bro?" he asked, nudging me. I ignored him, and he eventually returned to his game. Finally I snapped, "Aren't you supposed to be at work?" Without looking away from the screen, he replied, "Aren't you?" Watching him play, my anger grew. How could he sit there casually playing video games while my life was falling apart? Why did things come so easily to him while I carried all the weight? I exploded, surprising even myself. "Can you turn that crap off? What are you, 16? Lance shrugged, unfazed, and kept playing. "What's your problem?" he asked calmly. That's how Lance handled everything. Nothing ever fazed him. My rage boiled over. I grabbed his controller and smashed it against the wall. "What the hell, Art?" he yelled. "What's wrong with you? You?" I shouted, poking him in the chest. "You're what's wrong with me. If you got a problem, leave. This is my place. Go back home to your wife." I snapped. We'd fought before, but this time was different. Fueled by anger, I attacked again. But Lance, always stronger, easily overpowered me, knocking me out cold. When I came to, I heard Lance on the phone. "I don't know what's wrong with him," he said. Seeing me awake, he smirked and tossed me an ice pack. "You done acting like an idiot? Why did you call Paige?" I groaned. "She's your wife. She should deal with you," he replied. "Call her back. Tell her I left or died. I don't care. I can't talk to her right now." His expression softened. "What's going on, Art? You come over here and swing at me? What's your deal?" Reluctantly, I told him about the day's events. The sick feeling after a bad meal, deciding to work from home, and the unexpected discovery that shattered my world. I didn't expect Paige to be home, and the strange car outside didn't raise alarms. I was too focused on reaching the bathroom, unaware that my life was about to change forever. As I finished recounting the story, Lance grew serious. "That witch," he yelled. "Screw her." I chuckled darkly. Funny, that's what that guy was doing. Ignoring my comment, Lance started pacing. "Who is this guy? Do we know him?" He paused, looking worried. "Tell me it's not Brian." "No, not Brian." But the guy looked familiar. A knock at the door interrupted us. It was Paige. "He left," Lance said coldly, cutting off her protests. When he returned, I gave him a grateful smile, and we spent the rest of the afternoon in silence. Eventually, I knew I had to face Paige. Staying away was just delaying the inevitable. When I got home, everything looked normal, almost as if it had all been a bad dream. But it wasn't. Inside, Paige tried to talk. "We should talk," she said. I sighed, staying silent. She apologized, but it felt hollow, more about how I found out than the betrayal itself. I sarcastically threw her words back at her, mocking her empty apology. We argued about everything but the core issue, dodging the real pain. Then, eventually I asked, "How long has it been since we made love?" She hesitated. "What does that have to do with anything?" "It's like you were just doing me a favor," I said. "But that guy, he gets enthusiasm." She didn't answer, and I knew I was just trying to provoke her. But I wanted her to feel something, anything close to what I felt. But she couldn't, because I hadn't cheated. I had kept my vows. After a tense silence, I finally asked, "Do you still love me, Paige?" Her hesitation was telling. "Yes, but not in the same way, not anymore." "Not in that way," I repeated, realizing she didn't love me anymore. Exhausted, I got up to leave. She grabbed my hand. "Don't run away. We need to finish this." I pulled away. "What's left to say? You don't love me." "That's not what I said," she insisted. "I know you're hurt and I regret it. But you're twisting my words." "Right, because you understand me so well," I sneered. "When did you stop loving me? Before or after you started cheating? Because I don't remember you ever mentioning it." She narrowed her eyes. "Being an idiot won't make this easier." "My mistake. I didn't realize how tough this was for you," I responded sarcastically. She started to respond but stopped, her patience finally gone. "You know what, Artie? You're right. I should stop apologizing. You'll just twist everything I say." I couldn't resist one more jab. "Was this you trying to spare my feelings?" That was it. Her face hardened and she smirked. "Yes, I was sparing your feelings. I wasn't going to tell you that you're a boring, overweight man who's terrible in bed. Or that the last time we had fun was before I got pregnant. But since you insist..." Her words cut deep. I wanted the truth, but not this brutally. So I retaliated. "Well, when your wife just lies there like a blow-up doll, what do you expect?" Unfazed, she delivered the final blow. "If you'd seen me with Derek, you'd know what I'm like with a man who knows what he's doing." That hit me hard. My pride shattered. I was speechless, her words echoing in my head. Seeing my reaction, her anger shifted to regret. "Artie, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it," she began, but I left the room before she could finish. The next morning I woke up in the guest room disoriented and late for work. Her words, boring, overweight man, echoed in my mind as I stared at my reflection. Before yesterday I thought my life was good, comfortable with a decent job, a nice house and kids in private school, but apparently that wasn't enough for her. She wanted someone who wasn't me. As I left the bathroom, Paige and I awkwardly crossed paths in the hallway. "I need to wake Josh," she said. "Okay," I mumbled. We quickly went our separate ways, and I was relieved to leave the house. At work I tried to focus, but my mind kept drifting back to Paige and her affair. Her words haunted me. "If you really saw me with Derek, you'd know what I'm like with a man who knows what he's doing." My phone buzzed, a text from Paige. "Last night got out of hand, we need to talk without the petty nonsense." Anger flared, but I didn't lash out. I simply replied, "Agreed, we'll talk tonight." Her response came quickly. "Okay, see you then." At work, I couldn't shake her cruel words, especially as I visited a store managed by a fit young guy named Phil. Watching him work, I couldn't help but compare myself, her words echoing in my mind. When I asked Phil how he stayed fit, he gave me a gym card, suggesting I check it out. I stuffed it in my wallet, unsure if I'd ever use it. At home, Paige and I sat in silence until I finally asked, "Why, Paige?" A tear slipped down her cheek. "Because I'm not attracted to you anymore. We've lost the spark." Clenching my teeth, I asked, "And I suck in bed, right?" She shook her head sadly. "I'm sorry for what I said yesterday, I was angry." "Is it true?" I asked, but her silence answered. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let this go on for years instead of talking to me?" I asked, frustrated. I tried at first but nothing changed, so I convinced myself I had no right to be unhappy. I couldn't believe it. You never told me I was bad in bed. But I did mention your weight, she said defensively. How was I supposed to know that meant you were unhappy in our marriage? I retorted. I thought it was just a phase. Why didn't you try to fix us then? She shot back. I wasn't the one cheating, I replied sharply. If you were so unhappy you should have spoken up, not stepped out. After a moment of silence, she quietly said, I think we should get a divorce, Artie. Her words echoed in my mind. Logically it made sense, but love isn't logical. I felt a surge of anger not just about the cheating, but because I wasn't the one suggesting the split. I should have been the one to end it, but I was still holding on to hope. Of course you think we should, I said sarcastically. Never mind the twins, right? Divorce because you need sex. Come on, Artie. You said you were unhappy too. Yeah, but... I started to argue but realized it was pointless. She was done and I needed to get away. This time when I left, she didn't stop me. As I was about to leave, one last question burned in my mind. Without turning around, I asked, who was that guy? Derek. His name is Derek. He works with me, she replied. Derek, I whispered, recalling him from an office party 2 years ago. You two danced a lot. Sensing my implication, she quickly responded, we weren't sleeping together then, I promise. I scoffed bitterly, I guess that's something. But you were flirting, right? What does it matter, Artie? She asked sadly. It matters to me, she rolled her eyes. Fine. There was some attraction, maybe flirting, but it was just office banter. Things didn't get serious until we started meeting at the gym. Of course the gym, I muttered venomously. That's when you decided to wreck our marriage, right? Because I'm just the boring fat guy. Artie. She whined, but I ignored her. He's great in bed, right? Turns you into a nympho. Those were your words. She just repeated, I'm sorry I said those things. Tired of her hollow apologies, I muttered, whatever, and walked out. I drove straight to my brother's place. He took one look at me and stepped aside. Staying over? He asked. I nodded. He returned with a blanket. Thanks, I said. No problem. Just don't act like an idiot or I'll knock you out again, he joked, heading to bed. I spread the blanket on the couch, undressed and washed up. Catching my reflection in the mirror, I shook my head and walked out. As I lay on the couch, I wondered how my life had come to this. I did everything right, worked hard, stayed loyal, but here I was, crashing on my brother's couch like I was the one who messed up. Sleep was elusive. My mind kept replaying scenes of Paige and Derek, not just in bed but at the gym and work, laughing and flirting. Those images hurt more than what I saw in the shower. Did they ever talk about me, compare us? The thoughts stung deeply. I finally dozed off only to wake when Lance started getting ready for work. He grabbed a yogurt and ate it standing up in the kitchen looking like a college kid. I held back my thoughts. After all, I was crashing at his place with no plans to leave anytime soon. Are you going to work today? He asked. I don't know, maybe, I replied. He shook his head and finished his yogurt, giving me one last piece of advice before leaving. Art, don't let that which turn you into a sad loser. Move on, there are plenty of women out there. I didn't respond. His advice, though well-intentioned, felt clueless. He saw my situation as just another breakup, not realizing the difference between my 12-year marriage and his fleeting flings. Life had always been easier for Lance. He had the looks and charm while I worked hard for everything. I stayed with Lance for a week before we both needed space. Paige texted me several times asking where I was and if I was coming back. I ignored her until she mentioned the twins had questions. I knew I had to face the kids, so I went home. I planned to go when the house was empty, but when I pulled into the driveway, Paige's car was already there. Inside, I found her in the bedroom packing my clothes. You're finally back, she said. What are you doing with my clothes? I asked. I wasn't sure you were coming back, so I started packing them to save you the trouble, she replied. You knew where I was, Paige. You left me to handle the kids alone, she shot back. Do you remember why I left in the first place? I asked incredulously. After a pause, she admitted, "Okay, it's my fault. I was wrong for cheating and you have every right to be angry." "Did you ever love me?" I asked honestly. "I did and I still do in a way," she replied, implying that love had changed. Realizing nothing could be salvaged, I said, "I'll move my stuff to the guest room." She nodded sadly. Trying to lighten the mood, I added, "I'm getting a new bed for that room." She chuckled. "Yeah. You bought that uncomfortable bed to keep Lance from staying too long." "Well, that plan backfired," I laughed. We moved my clothes in silence, agreeing to an unspoken truce. The rest of the day passed in cold politeness. That evening we sat the twins down to explain what was happening. Watching my kids struggle with the news was almost unbearable. I couldn't even look at Paige, knowing she was the cause of all this pain. Over the next few weeks, life dragged on. I contacted a lawyer who told me we'd have to be separated for a year before filing for divorce. We agreed on a separation with heated discussions about the terms. Paige wanted to date, and I insisted she keep it away from the kids. After 2 weeks, I moved out into a new apartment. After moving out, life felt bleak. One day while sitting in my empty apartment, I saw a commercial for the gym Phil had recommended. I decided to check it out. When I arrived, I immediately felt out of place, but Naomi, the manager, greeted me warmly and convinced me to take a tour. Hesitant but curious, I agreed. During the gym tour, Naomi showed me the amenities, but what really caught my eye was a wall of before and after photos. She pointed to one picture and said that was me when I first joined. I was stunned. Her before photo showed her at about 200 pounds. She explained, "I gained a lot of weight during my pregnancy. My husband bought me a treadmill for Christmas, which I didn't appreciate at first, but it pushed me to make a change. With my brother-in-law's help, I lost over 75 pounds. "Wow," I said, genuinely impressed. "So Arthur, don't feel out of place. We all start somewhere. Maybe one day your picture will be up here too." Her words convinced me and I signed up for a membership. I started with the beginner program, where a trainer showed me the equipment and gave tips for effective workouts. I then booked one-on-one sessions with a trainer named Manny every Wednesday at 8 a.m. to create a personalized workout routine. I also tried various classes, enjoying the Thursday biking class but finding yoga less fun than expected. Meeting others on similar journeys made me feel less alone. While the gym helped me stay sane, things with Paige only worsened. One evening I visited the kids at our old home and found Paige's niece babysitting. When I asked where Paige was, the niece seemed nervous, hinting that Paige was likely out with Derek. I stayed to spend time with the kids and sent the niece home. Paige returned around 11, surprised to see me. She looked beautiful in her black dress, but her disheveled appearance suggested she hadn't just been out dancing. I calmly said, "I came to see the kids. Since I was here, I sent Penny home. If I'd known you'd be this late, I wouldn't have." She seemed to gauge my mood, but I was emotionally drained. "I didn't know you were here." "I'm sorry," she said, avoiding eye contact. I shook my head and stood up. "No worries. Crap happens," I said flatly, heading for the door. As I grabbed my coat, she quietly thanked me for paying Penny. "No problem." "Good night, Paige," I replied and walked out. Months later at the gym, I pushed through a tough workout, but when I stepped on the scale, I found I'd only lost 10 pounds in 3 months. Frustrated, I stormed out, feeling life was unfair. Outside, Naomi noticed my mood and asked if everything was okay. Before I knew it, I spilled everything. My weight loss struggles, Paige, my kids, and even Lance. She listened attentively and then asked, "What do you really want, Arthur?" I admitted I wanted to feel good about myself, she explained. "Losing weight alone won't make you happy. Real self-esteem comes from within, not just looks. You need to know your worth beyond appearance." Her words resonated with me. She then gave me a card for her brother-in-law Jerry, a personal trainer and life coach, and encouraged me to give it my all if I chose to work with him. A week later I met Jerry, who was fit and intimidating. He was professional, almost cold, and warned me that this wouldn't be easy. His approach was strict, no excuses, no exceptions. He even inspected my kitchen and asked personal questions about my habits. Despite his tough demeanor, I agreed to follow his regimen. Jerry's program was intense. The first day, I met with a nutritionist who taught me about healthy eating. I learned how much my diet needed to change and started cooking all my meals. The workouts were brutal, but gradually I adjusted. Despite the challenges, I knew I was making progress, both physically and mentally. I was constantly hungry and exhausted. My entire body ached and simple tasks became difficult. All I wanted to do was rest, but I couldn't neglect my kids. Despite the exhaustion, I made time for them. Paige, to her credit, made it easier for me. She didn't mind if I dropped by the house even unannounced. Maybe it was guilt, but I believed she genuinely wanted to do what was best for the kids. She insisted I keep the house key. I think the unspoken agreement was that I would respect her privacy. Unfortunately, I didn't hold up my end. Jealousy got the better of me. It started as innocent curiosity, just poking around when I thought I wouldn't get caught. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just trying to see how things were without me around. The first odd thing I noticed was a new toothbrush in the bathroom. At first I didn't think much of it, but then I saw men's body wash in the shower and started to worry. There were no men's clothes in the closet, but I found a pair of boxer shorts in her laundry basket. Seeing another man's underwear mixed with my wife's things felt like a violation, as if he was taking over my space. I swallowed my anger and acted as if nothing was wrong. I didn't want her to know I was snooping. Keeping her in the dark seemed like a way to gather more information. Plus, I wanted to appear unaffected, as if her actions didn't bother me. I also asked the kids if they'd noticed anything unusual, or if any new people had been visiting. They didn't seem to know what I was talking about, so I assumed Paige was keeping her end of the deal by not involving them. It seemed her dates happened while the kids were at school or on nights out, but no matter how hard I tried to hide it, I'm sure Paige sensed my pain. It's difficult to conceal that kind of hurt for long. Sometimes she'd give me a guilty look when she caught me watching her, knowing how easily she was moving on while I remained stuck in regret. It hurt, and sometimes I couldn't pretend it didn't. Jerry's workouts helped. His barking orders during bench presses or smacking my stomach during sit-ups distracted me from thoughts of Paige. Even his sarcastic remarks about my nickname helped channel my frustration away from my problems. Work also became a refuge. Like many men in my situation, I found solace in my job. At work, I was valued based on performance. Numbers and results mattered. If something wasn't working, you fixed it. If only marriages were that straightforward. Months passed both quickly and painfully slow. The days were filled with agony, but pain also reminded me I was still alive. The body has an incredible ability to heal and adapt. Over time, I grew stronger physically and emotionally. Bit by bit, my heart became numb to the situation with Paige. Our relationship shifted so subtly that I didn't notice until it had changed significantly. The change became clear a couple of weeks before our separation anniversary. One evening, the kids were asleep and I was waiting for Paige to come home so I could leave. I spilled soda on my shirt, so I decided to wash it right away. I assumed Paige wouldn't be back until later, but she surprised me by coming home early. I rushed to the kitchen to grab my shirt from the dryer, feeling self-conscious. I didn't want her seeing my bare chest, still haunted by her past judgments. As I struggled to untangle the wet shirt, I didn't notice her until I heard her footsteps stop behind me. I turned to find her staring at me wide-eyed as if seeing something unexpected. Her gaze made me even more anxious, and I tried to cover myself with the twisted shirt. Hey Paige, how was your night?" I asked, trying to sound casual but desperate for her to stop staring. "It was fine," she replied slowly, not breaking eye contact. Okay." I could feel the tension in the air, her eyes silently comparing me to her sex god. It took all my remaining pride not to flee the room. Instead, I held my head high and said, "The kids are in bed, dinner's done and homework's finished. I'm heading out now. If you don't mind, I'll use your bathroom before I leave." Then I quickly left the kitchen. When I got to the bathroom, I finally managed to untangle the shirt. Before putting it on, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and was shocked, just like Paige had been earlier. My apartment only had a small mirror that barely showed enough to shave, so I hadn't been paying much attention to my appearance. After my disappointing experience on the scale, I had been avoiding mirrors altogether, preferring to remain in blissful ignorance. But this mirror covered the wall above the sink, reflecting my entire torso. I was stunned by what I saw. My chest had definition, and my midsection was noticeably slimmer. The excess fat that used to stick out had flattened. My shoulders were broader, creating a more V-shaped physique. I wasn't ready for a fitness magazine cover, but I looked far better than the out-of-shape version of myself I had been used to. For the first time I saw an attractive man in the mirror, and that man was me. Was this why Paige had been staring at me? Maybe she wasn't disgusted. Maybe she was attracted. That moment in her bathroom was a turning point for me. It was the first time I actually felt worthy. When I left the bathroom, I casually walked past her and said, "All right, Paige, I'm off, have a good night." Her eyes lingered on me as I left, but this time I didn't shy away from her gaze. I embraced it, though I pretended not to notice. Good night, Artie," she replied, her voice softer than usual. With a newfound confidence, I walked out the door with a bit of a swagger. After that moment in Paige's bathroom, I became more aware of the changes I had made without realizing it. I constantly compared myself to how I was when I first started. Some changes were obvious, like my clothes fitting differently. My dress shirt collars were no longer tight around my neck, and my waist size had dropped from 44 to 36. Other changes were smaller but still satisfying. I could bend down and get up more easily, tie my shoes without spreading my legs wide, and get in and out of the car without grunting. When Jerry saw me next, he noticed the change in my attitude. The fatigue had lifted, the weights felt lighter, the treadmill less daunting, and my energy levels soared. I even found myself checking my reflection more often during workouts. Jerry caught on and couldn't resist teasing me. "Looks like someone finally noticed the results of his hard work," he joked. I laughed. "Yeah, you caught me." "Oh, go ahead and admire yourself," he said, stepping aside dramatically. "I'm not in your way, am I handsome?" "No, you're not, idiot, thanks for asking," I said, laughing so hard I had to stop lifting. "Anytime, Your Highness." I wouldn't want to stand in the way of love at first sight. For the first time, Jerry called me Your Highness without the usual snark. It was nice to joke around with him for a change, as he usually acted like a tough drill sergeant. Another significant change I noticed was how people interacted with me. They seemed friendlier, lingered a bit longer when they looked at me, and smiled more. It might sound shallow, but I couldn't deny it. Attractive people do get treated better, it's a sad reality. I realized Paige wasn't immune to this either. Ever since that night at her house, she'd been more attentive, smiling more, and even brushing her hair out of her face in a way that felt almost flirtatious. She stopped treating me with pity and started showing me respect. Everything came to a head on our separation anniversary. I had contacted my lawyer and gave the go-ahead to prepare the divorce papers. I wanted them ready so Paige and I could move on. Instead of having her served, which felt impersonal, I decided to give them to her directly. We were in a good place, and I felt the end of our marriage deserved the same respect as its beginning. That night, I found her upstairs getting ready, possibly for another date. She was in front of the mirror, putting on earrings. I knocked on the doorframe to get her attention. "Oh, hey Artie," she said, turning around. She spread her arms and asked, "How do I look?" "Hey Paige, you look beautiful, but I'm sure you already knew that," I replied. Her eyes did that familiar roving thing, taking me in. "No, just trying on clothes to see how they fit." "You remember this dress?" I took a closer look and then burst out laughing. "Isn't that the dress I bought you for your birthday? What was it, 8 years ago?" She smiled brightly and laughed. "It was 9 years ago, remember? I saw it in the window and mentioned I liked it. You said we couldn't afford it, but you didn't tell me you got that promotion. Then you surprised me by coming home with the dress and the good news." "I remember," I said with a nostalgic smile. "We celebrated that night at the new Italian restaurant." Her gaze shifted and she added softly, "That's also the night we conceived the twins." Pleasant memories flooded my mind, recalling how close we were that night. But suddenly, those happy memories turned dark. I pictured myself struggling to please her while she was half asleep, only for another man to replace me in my mind. Though I didn't remember Derek's face, the thought of him haunted me. The room felt heavy with unspoken tension. I shook off the thoughts and said coolly, "I have something for you." I dropped a manila envelope on the bed, and her expression darkened as she looked at it. Wow, you didn't waste any time getting that ready, did you? She said bitterly. Well, it did take me a year. I joked, hoping to lighten the mood, but she didn't laugh or smile. She just turned back to the mirror, expressionless, as if the papers didn't matter. I'll look at them when I get a chance, she said flatly, dismissing me. I left the room, puzzled by her reaction. I didn't expect a celebration, but I thought she'd at least be relieved to start the process. I found Josh first, playing video games in his room. Is your homework done? I asked sternly. He turned quickly, guilt written on his face. Almost, he mumbled, looking away. Seeing my expression, he added, I'll finish it now. Good choice. He grumbled under his breath as he turned off the game, but I pretended not to hear. Sometimes it's best to walk away before you have to discipline your kids for something minor. Next, I found Allie in the living room, flipping through a photo album. I recognized the cover, our wedding album. No need to ask about homework, she was always on top of it. I sat next to her and put my arm around her. Hey Pumpkin, what are you looking at? I asked. Just your and Mommy's wedding pictures, she replied, pausing on one of me and Lance in our tuxedos. You look just the same, especially since you lost all that weight. You look really handsome now. So I wasn't handsome before, I teased, laughing as she tried to backtrack. After a few seconds, I let her off the hook. Just kidding, thanks for the compliment. She smiled and leaned into me, but then her expression turned serious. Are you and Mommy ever gonna get back together? I sighed, wishing I could avoid this conversation. No, sweetie, I don't think so, I answered honestly, thinking of the divorce papers on Paige's bed. Why not? She asked. Sometimes adults realize they can't stay married, but that doesn't stop us from loving you. So you and Mommy don't love each other anymore? She pressed, seeing through my attempt to soften the truth. We care about each other, but not like husband and wife. That's why we have to split up, but we'll always be friends. Allie looked sad and turned away. I kissed her forehead, but it felt like a small gesture against her big questions. Explaining divorce to a 9-year-old is tough. To them, it's simple: if you love each other, you stay together. Why can't life be that straightforward? I used to think it was. But everything changed when Derek entered the picture. I sensed someone behind me and turned to see Paige walking away. As Allie and I continued looking through the album, I wondered how much of our conversation she had overheard. A few nights later, I decided to attend my weekly biking class. I hadn't been in a while since starting with Jerry, so there were some unfamiliar faces. I spotted a familiar one and took the bike next to her. Hey Colleen, I greeted cheerfully. She turned and smiled when she recognized me. Arthur, long time no see, I almost didn't recognize you, you've slimmed down. Too good.